The dogs looked ahead and stood alert. The birds on the tree flew away at an instant's. A woman walks into the house of a man who hasn't spoken in 6 years, and she's the reason why. London, 1813. The season glitters like broken glass, all sharp edges and reflected light, and tonight, in a ballroom thick with candle smoke and whispered cruelty, Clara Vale's life is ending. Not with a bang, not with drama, but with 3 words, spoken by the Marquis of Ashford's youngest son, drunk on champagne and entitlement. She seduced me. A lie. A simple, devastating lie. And just like that, the ton, that glittering, merciless machine of English aristocracy, begins to chew her up. Heads turn, fans snap open like wings, mothers pull their daughters close, as if ruin were contagious. Clara doesn't run, she doesn't weep. She curtsies, once to no one in particular, and walks out into the rain with her head high and her future in ashes. Because here's what they don't tell you about scandal in Regency England. It doesn't matter if you're guilty. It only matters if they believe you are. 3 weeks later, Clara is jobless, penniless, and 1 week away from debtor's prison when the letter arrives. Black wax, no return address, an offer of employment cataloguing and restoring a private music collection at an estate called Dunwith Hall. The pay is extraordinary, the terms are strange, total discretion, no visitors, a 6-month contract with room and board. She doesn't ask questions. Desperation has a way of making you reckless. She accepts before the ink dries. The journey north takes 2 days through countryside that grows darker and wilder with every mile. When the carriage finally stops, Clara steps out into a world carved from granite and silence. Dunwith Hall rises before her like a monument to something dead. Stone towers black with rain, windows that reflect nothing, gardens overgrown with ivy that looks less like decoration and more like a slow, deliberate burial. The air tastes of earth and old wood and something else, something colder. The driver won't meet her eyes as he sets down her trunk and leaves without a word, and Clara realizes with a strange, creeping certainty that she has just crossed a threshold she cannot uncross. The housekeeper, Mrs. Laundry, is a woman carved from the same stone as the house, grey, unyielding, and watchful. She leads Clara through corridors that swallow sound, past portraits of stern-faced men whose eyes seem to follow, and Clara asks the question everyone asks, "Will I meet the Duke?" Mrs. Laundry stops, turns, and when she speaks, her voice is flat as a tombstone. The Duke does not take meetings, Miss Vale. The Duke does not attend dinners. The Duke does not speak. You will work. You will keep to your rooms. You will not wander, and you will never, under any circumstances, enter the East Wing. Clara should feel afraid. Instead, she feels something far more dangerous: curiosity. Her rooms are beautiful in the way abandoned things are beautiful. High ceilings, velvet drapes thick with dust, and a window that overlooks nothing but fog and forest. That night, Clara cannot sleep. The house breathes around her, all creaks and whispers, and the distant sound of something she can't quite place. A draught, maybe, or footsteps. She rises, wraps herself in a shawl, and does exactly what she's been told not to do. She wanders. The East Wing is locked, of course, but the door to the music room is not. Clara pushes it open and stops breathing. Instruments everywhere, violins hung like executed criminals, a pianoforte covered in white cloth like a corpse, sheet music scattered across the floor in drifts, yellowed and brittle with age, and in the centre of it all, a conductor's stand, empty, This was a room where beauty lived once. Now it's a mausoleum. Clara moves to the piano, pulls back the cloth, and without thinking, without permission, she plays. A single chord, then another. Beethoven, the Pathétique. Her fingers remember even when her heart doesn't. The sound fills the room like water rushing into a shipwreck, and for one perfect, reckless moment, Clara feels alive again. And that's when she feels it, the weight of being watched. She spins, but the doorway is empty. The shadows are still, yet the air has changed. Someone was here. Someone heard. Clara's pulse hammers in her throat as she backs away from the piano, and she understands suddenly and completely that she has just made a terrible mistake. The next morning, Mrs. Landry brings her breakfast and a warning. "The Duke heard you last night, Miss Vale. He was displeased." But here's the strange part. Clara isn't dismissed. Instead, she's summoned, not to meet the Duke, but to begin her work in the same music room, cataloguing the wreckage of something that was clearly meant to stay buried. And as she sorts through decades of compositions, some finished, some abandoned mid-phrase like thoughts interrupted, she begins to see patterns, coded notations, strange time signatures, music that isn't quite music. And then she finds it, a signature at the bottom of a half-burned manuscript, A.T., Alaric Thorne. The Duke himself. He was a composer, a brilliant one, and these pieces, some of them, they feel familiar in a way that makes Clara's stomach twist with something that tastes like guilt. Because years ago, before her fall, Clara transcribed music for a salary, anonymous work, letters from the front, soldiers' correspondence, sometimes with musical annotations she never questioned. She was paid well to ask nothing. And now, standing in this room full of ghosts, Clara recognizes the handwriting, the cadence, the signature phrasing. She helped transcribe the very letters that were forged, leaked, and weaponized in the scandal that destroyed this man's life. She didn't know. She was a pawn. But her hands, her talented, innocent hands, helped build the cage he's been locked in ever since. And he knows. He must know. That's why she's here. Not for restoration, for reckoning. That night, Clara hears it again, the sound that isn't wind, isn't the house settling. Footsteps just outside her door. She arises, heart pounding, and opens it to find a corridor empty. But on the floor, placed with deliberate care, is a single sheet of music, unfinished, haunting, a composition she's never seen but somehow knows in her bones. And at the bottom, written in ink still wet enough to smudge, "You played beautifully. Don't stop now." The Duke of Wessex has been silent for 6 years, but he's been listening all along. So here's the question, the one that'll keep you awake tonight. What happens when the man who knows your darkest secret is the same man who makes you feel less alone than you've ever been? And what if saving him means destroying yourself? Clara plays the unfinished composition at midnight, and for the first time in 6 years, the Duke of Wessex walks towards something instead of away from it. She shouldn't be in the music room, not at this hour, not alone. But the sheet of music he left outside her door burns in her hands like a challenge, and Clara Vale has never been good at resisting challenges. The notes are complex, layered, almost mathematical in their precision, but underneath the structure there's something raw, something bleeding. She positions her fingers over the keys, takes a breath that tastes like fear and defiance, and begins to play. The melody unfolds like a confession, starts hesitant, builds to something desperate, then fractures into silence where the composition stops mid-phrase, unfinished. unresolved. The last chord hangs in the air like a question no one dared to answer, and that's when she hears it, the sound of breathing that isn't her own. Clara's hands freeze above the keys. She doesn't turn around, not yet, because turning around makes it real, and if it's real, then he's real, and if he's real, then everything changes. "I know you're there," she says to the shadows, and her voice doesn't shake even though her hands do. Silence. Then, from somewhere behind her, so quiet she almost mistakes it for the house settling, "You play it wrong." Clara spins on the bench so fast she nearly falls, and there he is, Alaric Thorne, Duke of Wessex, the sovereign of silence himself, standing in the doorway like something carved from midnight and restraint. Tall, severe, dark hair longer than fashion allows, eyes the color of winter storms, and a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so carefully, deliberately blank. He wears no jacket, no cravat, just shirt sleeves and waistcoat, as if he wasn't expecting to be seen, as if he came here against his better judgment. Clara should curtsy, should apologize, should do any of the 100 things a gentlewoman is supposed to do when confronted by a duke in the middle of the night. Instead, she says, "Then show me how it's meant to be played." The silence that follows is so complete, Clara can hear her own heartbeat. Alaric doesn't move, doesn't speak again. For a moment, she thinks he'll simply vanish, retreat back into whatever fortress he's built inside himself. But then, slowly, like a man approaching the edge of a cliff, he walks toward the piano. His footsteps are deliberate, measured. Each one costs him something. He stops beside her, close enough that Clara can smell cedar and old books and something darker, something like grief. He doesn't ask her to move. She doesn't offer. They share the bench in a silence that feels more intimate than any conversation, and when his hands settle on the keys, long fingers, calloused in ways that speak of years of practice, Clara stops breathing altogether. He plays, and God, the way he plays! It's the same composition, but it's not the same at all. Where Clara found precision, Alaric finds pain. Where she saw structure, he reveals desperation. The melody doesn't ask questions, it demands answers. It rises and breaks and rebuilds itself, and Clara realizes with a shock that cuts bone deep, this isn't just music, this is memory. This is everything he can't say, translated into sound, because silence, it turns out, has its own language, and Clara is finally learning to speak it. When he reaches the point where the composition ends, his hands hover over the keys for a heartbeat, too, and then he plays further, notes that weren't on the page. The continuation she couldn't see. The piece builds to something almost unbearable, a climax that feels less like resolution and more like surrender, and then stops. Not ends, stops, as if he's still deciding how the story finishes. His hands drop to his lap. Clara realizes she's crying and doesn't remember when that started. "Why did you stop composing?" she whispers, because the silence between them has become the kind that demands truth. Alaric doesn't look at her. His jaw tightens. When he finally speaks, his voice is rough with disuse, barely more than a rasp. "Because the last time I created something beautiful, it was used to destroy people." He stands, puts distance between them again, and Clara sees it now. The way he moves like a man who doesn't trust himself, who's built walls so high he can't see over them anymore. "That music you transcribed," he continues, and Clara's blood turns to ice. "Those coded letters hidden in compositions sent to the front, they weren't from soldiers. They were forged, sold to the French. Names of British operatives embedded in time signatures and key changes. 17 men died because someone turned art into weaponry." He finally looks at her, and his eyes are devastated. My fiancée, she commissioned the work, used my connections, my reputation, and when it was discovered, when those men died, she let me take the blame. Clara can't breathe, can't think, because she remembers now, remembers the woman who hired her, elegant and cold, who paid triple the normal rate for discretion, who said the music was for her betrothed, a romantic surprise, love letters disguised as compositions. Clara had thought it beautiful, clever. She'd been so young, so desperate for work, so stupidly naive. I didn't know, she says, and it sounds pathetic even to her own ears. I was cleared eventually, Alaric continues, as if she hasn't spoken. 17 families still blame me. The Ton still whispers. And I learned something, Miss Vale. I learned that beauty, music, love, trust makes you vulnerable, makes you a weapon someone else can wield. So I stopped. Stopped composing, stopped speaking in public, stopped being anything other than exactly what they expect. Cold, untouchable, dead inside. He moves toward the door, and Clara knows with absolute certainty that if he leaves now, he'll never come back, that this crack in his armor will seal itself shut, and she'll spend 6 months in this house cataloguing the ruins of what he used to be, without ever seeing the man underneath again. "You're still doing it," she says. He stops. "You're still letting her win, still letting that betrayal dictate every choice you make, still letting beauty be the enemy instead of the thing worth fighting for." Clara stands, walks toward him, even though every instinct screams to give him space. "That composition you just played, you think that's death. That's the most alive thing I've heard in years. You think silence protects you? It's killing you, slowly. And I should know, because I'm guilty too. My hands helped build your cage, and I've been trying to atone ever since by making myself small, by accepting ruin as penance, by pretending I don't deserve anything good." She's close enough to see his pulse jump in his throat. "But maybe we're both wrong. Maybe the answer isn't less beauty. Maybe it's more. Maybe we fight back by refusing to let them make us ghosts." The air between them could catch fire. Alaric's hand moves, reaches toward her face, stops an inch away, trembles. "You don't know what you're asking," he says, and his voice breaks on the last word. "I'm asking you to finish the composition," Clara whispers. "I'm asking you to teach me the ending. I'm asking you to stop punishing yourself for someone else's crime." His hand finally touches her cheek, and the contact is electric, devastating. But then he pulls back like he's been burned. "I can't," he says, and he's gone before Clara can stop him, leaving her alone in the music room, with the ghost of his touch still burning her skin, and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that he's not as dead inside as he pretends to be. But here's what neither of them knows yet. Someone in London has noticed Clara's absence, and they're asking questions. 3 weeks pass. Clara catalogues by day and plays by night, and Alaric, he listens. Always unseen, always silent, but she knows he's there, can feel his attention like a physical thing. She starts leaving him messages in music, plays pieces she thinks he'll recognize, adds her own improvisations, turns the piano into... The air between them could catch fire. Alaric's hand moves, reaches toward her face, stops an inch away, trembles. "You don't know what you're asking," he says, and his voice breaks on the last word. "I'm asking you to finish the composition," Clara whispers. "I'm asking you to teach me the ending. I'm asking you to stop punishing yourself for someone else's crime. His hand finally touches her cheek, and the contact is electric, devastating. But then he pulls back like he's been burned. "I can't," he says, and he's gone before Clara can stop him, leaving her alone in the music room, with the ghost of his touch still burning her skin, and the terrible, wonderful knowledge that he's not as dead inside as he pretends to be. But here's what neither of them knows yet. Someone in London has noticed Clara's absence, and they're asking questions. 3 weeks pass. Clara catalogues by day and plays by night, and Alaric, he listens. Always unseen, always silent, but she knows he's there, can feel his attention like a physical thing. She starts leaving him messages in music, plays pieces she thinks he'll recognize, adds her own improvisations, turns the piano into a conversation they're too afraid to have with words. And slowly, impossibly, he begins to answer. Sheet music appears on the piano bench, corrections to her technique, then original compositions, short at first, mere phrases, but they grow longer, more vulnerable, until one night she finds a complete piece, and at the bottom, in his handwriting, "For C.V., the woman who remembers how to fight." Clara plays it and weeps, and doesn't know if she's falling in love or falling apart, or if there's any difference anymore. But the house is changing, too. Mrs. Laundry watches Clara with something almost like pity. The other servants whisper and won't meet her eyes. And one morning, Clara discovers her letters have been opened. Not carefully. Whoever did it wanted her to know. She confronts Mrs. Laundry, who looks genuinely afraid for the first time. "You don't understand, Miss Vale. There are people in London asking about you, about why the Duke hired you specifically, about what you're doing here." Clara's stomach drops. "What people?" Mrs. Laundry hesitates, then, "Society people, ton people. They're saying the Duke is keeping a mistress. They're saying you've seduced your way into Dunwith to trap him into marriage. The scandal's coming here, miss, and when it arrives, neither of you will survive it." That night, Clara doesn't play. She stands in the music room with Mrs. Laundry's warning ringing in her ears, and finally understands the full weight of what's happening. She's not just falling for the Duke, she's destroying him all over again. Her presence here, her music, her defiance, her very existence in his house is the spark that will reignite the fire that nearly consumed him 6 years ago. The ton doesn't forgive, doesn't forget, and they certainly don't tolerate a disgraced music tutor living unchaperoned in the home of England's most eligible Duke. It doesn't matter that nothing has happened. It doesn't matter that they're innocent. Innocence is irrelevant when reputation is currency and scandal is entertainment. She should leave, should pack her things and disappear before the damage spreads. But then she hears it, coming from somewhere deep in the house, from the forbidden East Wing, the sound of a violin, playing the composition he wrote for her, and Clara realizes something that terrifies her more than scandal, more than ruin, more than anything. Alaric is playing publicly for the first time in 6 years, and he's playing for her. He's already chosen, already decided that she's worth the risk. The question is, can she be brave enough to choose him back? Clara runs, through corridors she's never explored, past startled servants, toward the sound that grows louder with every step, until she's standing outside the East Wing's locked door, pounding with both fists and screaming, "Let me in! Alaric, let me in!" The music stops. Silence, that old enemy rushes back. And then the door opens. Alaric stands there with a violin still in his hand and an expression that looks like hope and terror fighting for dominance. "If I let you in," he says, voice raw, "if I let you see everything, the man I was, the man I am, the man I'm afraid I'll never be again, you can't leave, not without destroying us both." Clara doesn't hesitate. "Then I won't leave." She steps across the threshold, and the door closes behind her with a sound like fate being sealed. The East Wing is a gallery of ghosts, rooms full of his compositions, paintings he created before the scandal, letters he never sent, evidence of a life lived fully before it was murdered. And in the center of it all, like a shrine to everything he lost, stands a portrait. Young Alaric, maybe 25, holding a violin and laughing, actually laughing. Beside him, beautiful and cold-eyed, stands a woman in white, his former fiancée. Her name was Vivian Ashford, the Marquis's sister. She wanted power more than anything, more than love, more than art, more than me. When she sold those documents, when those men died, she knew exactly what she was doing, and when the Crown came looking for answers, she gave them mine. Clara stares at the portrait and feels the final piece click into place. Ashford, the Marquis's son who accused me of seduction. That was her brother's child, her nephew. Alaric's face goes white. It's not coincidence. She knows you're here. She knows what you mean to me. And she's doing it again, using you to destroy me, just like she used my music. The violation of it, the calculated cruelty makes Clara's hands shake with rage. So what do we do? Hide? Run? Let her win again? Alaric sets down his violin and takes both her hands in his, and for the first time since she arrived at Dunwith, he looks less like a ghost and more like a man. "No," he says, "we finish what we started. Together." But even as he says it, even as Clara feels something like hope bloom dangerous in her chest, neither of them hears the carriage arriving in the drive. Neither of them knows that Vivian Ashford herself, now Lady Vivian Montrose, has come to Dunwith with half the ton in tow, armed with accusations and witnesses and the full crushing weight of society's judgment. The scandal isn't coming, it's already here, and this time silence won't save them. So answer me this. When the world demands you choose between the person you're becoming and the reputation you've already lost, when love means social annihilation and silence means slow death, when the woman who destroyed you once comes back to finish the job, do you fight or do you surrender? And what if fighting back means exposing every secret, every shame, every broken, beautiful thing you've spent years trying to bury? What then? Here's what no one tells you about the moment your world ends. It doesn't explode. It simply walks through the front door wearing a silk gown and a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Lady Vivian Montrose arrives at Dunwith Hall with an entourage that includes 3 matrons of impeccable reputation, a magistrate, and enough witnesses to fill a courtroom. She doesn't knock. She doesn't wait to be announced. She sweeps into the entrance hall like she owns it, like she's owed it, and when her eyes land on Clara standing frozen at the top of the stairs, her smile widens into something that might look like triumph if you didn't know better, if you didn't see the hatred underneath. "Miss Vale," Vivian's voice cuts through the silence like crystal shattering. "How extraordinary to find you here, unchaperoned, residing in the home of an unmarried duke. Tell me, does the ton know about this charming arrangement? Clara's throat closes. Every servant in the hall has stopped moving, stopped breathing, waiting to see what happens when scandal finally catches up with the people who've been running from it. And that's when Alaric appears, not from the shadows this time, not hidden. He walks down the main staircase in full daylight, dressed impeccably, every inch the Duke of Wessex, and the silence he brings with him is different now, not absence, but presence, not weakness, but choice. He doesn't speak, doesn't need to. He simply positions himself beside Clara, close enough that the message is unmistakable. You go through me first. Vivian's smile falters, just for a moment, just long enough for Clara to see the flicker of uncertainty before it's buried under aristocratic disdain. Lady Montrose, Clara says, and she's amazed at how steady her voice sounds. Surely there's something specific you came to say. Vivian's eyes snap to her, glittering with malice. Indeed, I came to offer you a choice, Miss Vale. Leave done with immediately, return to London, and publicly confess that the Duke attempted to seduce you, that you fled his advances, and I'll ensure you receive a modest pension, enough to live quietly somewhere far from here. Refuse, and I'll have you brought before the magistrate on charges of fraud, theft, and moral corruption. Your trial will be very public, very detailed, and when it's over, you won't just be ruined, you'll be imprisoned. The threat hangs in the air like smoke. Clara's mind races. It's an impossible choice, except it's not a choice at all. Either way, Vivian wins. Either way, Alaric's reputation shatters again, and Clara disappears, into exile or into prison. It doesn't matter which. The outcome is the same. The Duke of Wessex returns to his silence, and the woman who destroyed him walks away unpunished. Again. But here's what Vivian doesn't know, what she can't know because she's never understood people who create instead of destroy. Clara and Alaric have been writing a different ending.
No, Clara says simply. Vivian blinks. I beg your pardon? No, I won't leave. I won't lie. I won't let you rewrite history a second time. Clara descends the stairs, each step deliberate, until she's standing face to face with the woman who haunts both their lives. 6 years ago, you used me to forge documents that killed 17 men. You paid me to transcribe music without telling me it contained coded intelligence. You destroyed the Duke's reputation, his art, his voice, and you faced no consequences. But the thing about truth, Lady Montrose, it doesn't disappear just because powerful people want it to. Vivian's face goes pale. You have no proof. Don't I? Clara pulls a folded paper from her sleeve, one of the original commissions she'd kept all these years, too afraid to destroy, too guilty to forget. Your signature, your payment, your handwriting requesting specific musical notations that I now know were code. Should we show it to the magistrate you brought? Should we ask him why a lady of quality was commissioning military correspondence disguised as love songs? The silence that follows is so complete, Clara can hear her own heartbeat thundering. Vivian's composure cracks like porcelain dropped on stone. That proves nothing. A contract for musical transcription isn't evidence of treason. Perhaps not alone, comes a voice from behind them, and everyone turns to see Mrs. Laundry standing in the doorway, holding a wooden box. I've kept these for 6 years, waiting for the right moment, waiting for someone brave enough to stand against her. The magistrate opens the box. His expression changes from skepticism to shock to something that looks like cold fury.
He looks at Vivian, and for the first time in her life, Lady Vivian Montrose appears truly afraid. "These will need to be examined by the Crown," the magistrate says quietly. "Lady Montrose, I'm afraid I must ask you to remain available for questioning." The entourage that came with Vivian begins to fracture, the matrons stepping back, distancing themselves, whispers starting like fire catching kindling. Scandal, Clara realizes, is about to consume the woman who's weaponized it for years. But Vivian isn't finished. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and she's been a predator too long to surrender quietly. "You think this saves you? You think proving my guilt erases yours? You still transcribed those letters. Your hands still wrote the words that killed those men. Tell them, Miss Vale, tell them how you took blood money and didn't ask questions because you needed the coin more than you needed a conscience." The accusation hits like a blade between ribs because it's true. Partially true, enough true that Clara feels the old shame rise like bile in her throat. She opens her mouth to respond, to defend, to explain, and then Alaric steps forward. And he speaks, not just to Clara, not hidden in darkness or whispered in empty rooms. He speaks clearly, deliberately, to the entire assembly, the first public words the Duke of Wessex has uttered in 6 years. Miss Vale was 19 years old. His voice carries through the hall like thunder after long silence, rough but unmistakable, desperate, alone, and hired by a woman who lied about every aspect of the work. She transcribed music. That was her crime. Trusting someone who wore a title and smiled while planning murder. If that makes her guilty, then indict half of England, every soldier who followed orders without knowing the full plan, every clerk who filed documents, every servant who delivered sealed letters. The guilt belongs to the person who forged the betrayal, not the tools she used to execute it. He turns to Vivian, and his expression is devastating in its coldness. "You wanted me silent because silence meant compliance, meant surrender. You thought if I never spoke, never created, never fought back, you'd win by default. But Miss Vale caught me something in these past months, that beauty isn't weakness, that vulnerability isn't defeat, that the truest rebellion against people who profit from destruction is to keep building anyway." He looks at Clara, and the warmth in his eyes nearly undoes her. She came to Dunwith broken, just as I was, and instead of letting that brokenness define us, we chose to create something new. Together. So yes, I've kept her here unchaperoned. Yes, we've spent hours alone in rooms society would find scandalous, and I would do it again. I would choose her again, every time. The hall erupts, gasps, whispers, shock radiating outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The magistrate clears his throat. "Your Grace, you understand what you're saying, the implications—" "I understand perfectly," Alaric interrupts, "and I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come from speaking the truth." He extends his hand to Clara. "The question is, will society punish honesty, or will it finally hold the guilty accountable?" Clara takes his hand, feels the calluses from violin strings, the strength in his grip, the slight tremor that says this costs him everything, but he's paying it anyway. And she realizes that this is the real ending he's been composing all along, not a melody that resolves neatly, but one that demands the listener decide what comes next. Vivian is escorted from Dunwith by the magistrate, her denials growing shriller as the evidence mounts. The society matrons, who came as her witnesses, leave as Clara's defenders, hungry for a new narrative where the villain finally faces justice. And Clara and Alaric stand together in the wreckage of the old story, ready to write a new one. Does the ton forgive them? Not immediately, not completely.
Scandal doesn't disappear just because truth emerges, but something shifts. Maybe it's the 17 families who finally have someone to hold accountable. Maybe it's the romantic appeal of a duke who broke 6 years of silence for love. Maybe people are simply tired of Vivian's cruelty and ready to cheer for someone else. Whatever the reason, slowly, impossibly, Dunwith begins to breathe again. Music returns to the halls. Alaric composes, Clara plays. They host no grand balls, seek no redemption from society, but they also stop hiding, stop apologizing for choosing each other over propriety. And late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels small enough to hold in 2 hands, Alaric finishes the composition he started 6 years ago. The ending isn't triumph, isn't tragedy. It's simply 2 melodies, distinct, complicated, imperfect, learning to harmonize. Clara plays it with him, their hands moving over keys and strings, and they don't speak because they don't need to. The music says everything, says we survived, says we chose this, says the story isn't over, it's just beginning. So here's my question for you. What would you sacrifice for the person who makes you feel alive again? Would you choose love over reputation, truth over safety? Would you speak when silence seems easier, fight when surrender seems inevitable? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know if you'd make the same choice Clara and Alaric did, or if you'd walk away. And if this story grabbed you, if it made you feel something, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're just getting started with stories that ask the hard questions. Next week, we're diving into another tale of scandals, secrets, and the price of defying society. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now go, tell me what you'd choose. I'll be reading every single comment.
The dogs looked ahead and stood alert. The birds on the tree flew away at an instant's. A woman walks into the house of a man who hasn't spoken in 6 years, and she's the reason why. London, 1813. The season glitters like broken glass, all sharp edges and reflected light, and tonight, in a ballroom thick with candle smoke and whispered cruelty, Clara Vale's life is ending. Not with a bang, not with drama, but with 3 words, spoken by the Marquis of Ashford's youngest son, drunk on champagne and entitlement. She seduced me. A lie. A simple, devastating lie. And just like that, the ton, that glittering, merciless machine of English aristocracy, begins to chew her up. Heads turn, fans snap open like wings, mothers pull their daughters close, as if ruin were contagious. Clara doesn't run, she doesn't weep. She curtsies, once to no one in particular, and walks out into the rain with her head high and her future in ashes. Because here's what they don't tell you about scandal in Regency England. It doesn't matter if you're guilty. It only matters if they believe you are. 3 weeks later, Clara is jobless, penniless, and 1 week away from debtor's prison when the letter arrives. Black wax, no return address, an offer of employment cataloguing and restoring a private music collection at an estate called Dunwith Hall. The pay is extraordinary, the terms are strange, total discretion, no visitors, a 6-month contract with room and board. She doesn't ask questions. Desperation has a way of making you reckless. She accepts before the ink dries. The journey north takes 2 days through countryside that grows darker and wilder with every mile. When the carriage finally stops, Clara steps out into a world carved from granite and silence. Dunwith Hall rises before her like a monument to something dead. Stone towers black with rain, windows that reflect nothing, gardens overgrown with ivy that looks less like decoration and more like a slow, deliberate burial. The air tastes of earth and old wood and something else, something colder. The driver won't meet her eyes as he sets down her trunk and leaves without a word, and Clara realizes with a strange, creeping certainty that she has just crossed a threshold she cannot uncross. The housekeeper, Mrs. Laundry, is a woman carved from the same stone as the house, grey, unyielding, and watchful. She leads Clara through corridors that swallow sound, past portraits of stern-faced men whose eyes seem to follow, and Clara asks the question everyone asks, "Will I meet the Duke?" Mrs. Laundry stops, turns, and when she speaks, her voice is flat as a tombstone. The Duke does not take meetings, Miss Vale. The Duke does not attend dinners. The Duke does not speak. You will work. You will keep to your rooms. You will not wander, and you will never, under any circumstances, enter the East Wing. Clara should feel afraid. Instead, she feels something far more dangerous: curiosity. Her rooms are beautiful in the way abandoned things are beautiful. High ceilings, velvet drapes thick with dust, and a window that overlooks nothing but fog and forest. That night, Clara cannot sleep. The house breathes around her, all creaks and whispers, and the distant sound of something she can't quite place. A draught, maybe, or footsteps. She rises, wraps herself in a shawl, and does exactly what she's been told not to do. She wanders.